Picture this. In the distant future, long after humanity has vanished from the Earth, an alien archaeological expedition sifts through the remnants of our civilization. Among the scattered fragments of literature, they discover portraits of our greatest thinkers: Socrates with his wild beard, Nietzsche with his magnificent mustache, Einstein with his untamed hair. And curiously, obsessively, these alien scholars begin to catalog not the ideas these humans produced, but their facial hair. They create elaborate theories about how the curl of a beard might contain the secrets of existence, how the precise trimming of a mustache could unlock the mysteries of consciousness itself. Absurd? Perhaps. But consider this. We do exactly the same thing. Howard Phillips Lovecraft, architect of cosmic horror, chronicler of humanity's insignificance, prophet of the indifferent void, wore a mustache. Not just any mustache, mind you, but a carefully maintained, old-fashioned Victorian-style mustache that he groomed with the same meticulous attention he brought to his otherworldly prose. Here was a man who spent his life contemplating humanity's utter meaninglessness in the face of an incomprehensible universe, yet he stood before his mirror each morning, carefully styling his facial hair. This is not merely biographical trivia. This is philosophy in action. What if I told you that Lovecraft's mustache, that seemingly insignificant tuft of carefully arranged keratin, represents one of the most profound philosophical statements about the human condition ever made? That in the simple act of grooming himself, of imposing order on chaos at the most personal level, Lovecraft embodied the very paradox that defines our species. We are creatures who know we are dust, yet we insist on styling that dust. We understand our cosmic insignificance, yet we cannot help but craft meaning from meaninglessness. We stare into the abyss, and then we fix our hair. Tonight, we explore what might be called Lovecraft's mustache philosophy. The idea that our desperate attempts to impose order, style, and dignity upon ourselves serve as both our greatest folly and our most beautiful act of defiance against an indifferent cosmos. Because if we're going to be insignificant specks in a vast, uncaring universe, we might as well be well-groomed insignificant specks. The question that will haunt us through this journey is simple, yet unsettling. Is the mustache merely decorative, or is it humanity's final, futile, magnificent gesture of rebellion against the void? Howard Phillips Lovecraft was born in 1890 into a world that was rapidly discovering just how small it really was. While he carefully maintained his antiquated mustache in the mirror of his Providence, Rhode Island home, the universe outside was revealing secrets that would shatter humanity's comfortable delusions of importance forever. Darwin had already dealt the first devastating blow, demonstrating that humans were not divinely crafted beings, but evolved animals, products of random mutation and brutal selection. But the revelations were just beginning. As Lovecraft reached intellectual maturity, astronomy was unveiling the true scale of cosmic space, not the cozy, human-centered universe of medieval imagination, but an infinite expanse of burning gases and dead rock stretching beyond all comprehension. Einstein's relativity would soon reveal that even time itself was relative, that the solid foundations of reality were far more fluid than anyone had dared imagine. Into this maelstrom of existential crisis stepped a pale, reclusive gentleman who dressed like it was still 1840, spoke in affected 18th century phrases, and maintained his facial hair with the precision of a Victorian dandy. Lovecraft's mustache was no accident. It was armor, a carefully constructed barrier between himself and the modern world that terrified him. But here's where it gets interesting. Lovecraft understood exactly what he was doing. He wasn't simply retreating into nostalgia. He was conducting a philosophical experiment. In his essays, particularly Supernatural Horror in Literature, he articulated a vision of reality that was breathtakingly bleak. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. For Lovecraft, the ultimate unknown was not some monster lurking in the shadows, but the truth of our utter cosmic irrelevance. He had read Schopenhauer, who declared that existence was fundamentally suffering, that the universe was driven by blind, irrational will that cared nothing for human happiness. He had absorbed Nietzsche's proclamation that God was dead and that we were left to create meaning in a meaningless void. But Lovecraft went further than either of these philosophers. Where Schopenhauer counseled resignation and Nietzsche advocated the creation of new values, Lovecraft stared directly into the horror of meaninglessness and refused to look away. His fictional cosmos reflected this philosophical position perfectly. In Lovecraft's stories, humans encounter entities like Cthulhu or Yog-Sothoth, beings so vast and alien that merely perceiving them drives people insane. These are not evil entities in any human sense. They are simply indifferent to humanity in the same way we are indifferent to bacteria. The horror comes not from malevolence, but from the realization of our utter irrelevance. And yet, and here's the crucial point, Lovecraft continued to groom his mustache. Every morning, this prophet of meaninglessness engaged in the most human of rituals, the careful cultivation of personal appearance. He understood that this act was absurd, perhaps even pathetic, but he did it anyway. Because to be human is to perform these small acts of self-creation, even when, especially when, we know they ultimately mean nothing. The mustache in this context becomes a perfect symbol of what we might call dignified absurdity. The human refusal to surrender style and self-cultivation even in the face of cosmic indifference. Lovecraft's careful grooming habits were not a denial of his philosophical insights, but an embodiment of them. They represented the paradox at the heart of human existence. We are creatures who know we are dust, yet we insist on styling that dust. This was not mere eccentricity or nostalgic affectation. This was a profound philosophical statement rendered in keratin and morning routine. If we must be nothing in the cosmic scheme, we will be a very well-dressed nothing. If our existence is ultimately absurd, we will make that absurdity as elegant as possible.
But why do we do this? Why does a creature capable of understanding its own cosmic insignificance continue to style itself? To answer this question, we must dig deeper into the psychology of existential terror and the strange ways human beings cope with the unbearable truth of their condition. Consider what psychologists call apophenia, the tendency to perceive meaningful patterns in random or meaningless information. It's the reason we see faces in clouds, hear messages in static, and find profound significance in the way a philosopher arranges his facial hair. Apophenia is not a bug in human cognition, it's a feature, a survival mechanism that helped our ancestors navigate a dangerous world by constantly searching for patterns that might indicate threats or opportunities. But in the modern world, this pattern-seeking behavior has taken on a more desperate quality. We live in an age where we understand, perhaps better than any generation before us, just how random and meaningless most events really are. Yet our brains continue to seek patterns, to impose order, to create significance where none exists. We cannot help ourselves. We are meaning-making machines stuck in a universe that provides no ultimate meaning to make. This is where Ernest Becker's insights in The Denial of Death become crucial. Becker argued that human civilization is essentially an elaborate defense mechanism against the terror of mortality. We create art, build monuments, establish traditions, and yes, carefully groom our facial hair, all in service of what he called immortality projects, attempts to achieve symbolic immortality by creating something that will outlast our physical bodies. Lovecraft's characters perfectly illustrate this dynamic. Think of the protagonists in stories like The Call of Cthulhu or At the Mountains of Madness. They are typically scholars, antiquarians, or professionals who have built their identities around their expertise and social position. When confronted with cosmic entities that render all human knowledge and status meaningless, they don't just face physical destruction, they face the complete annihilation of everything they've used to construct their sense of self. But here's the crucial insight. Even as these characters descend into madness, they continue to perform the rituals of their former lives. They take notes, they maintain their scholarly vocabulary, they try to impose familiar categories on incomprehensible phenomena. Even in the face of ultimate meaninglessness, they cannot stop trying to create meaning. Lovecraft himself embodied this paradox perfectly. He knew, intellectually, that his antiquated mannerisms and careful grooming were absurd affectations in the modern world. He understood that his racist anxieties and elitist pretensions were psychological defenses against his own feelings of powerlessness and insignificance. Yet he could not simply abandon these behaviors because they were the tools he used to construct his identity in the face of an indifferent universe. The mustache in this psychological framework becomes a perfect metaphor for what we might call defensive theater, the constant performance of selfhood that humans engage in to protect themselves from existential terror. Every morning, as Lovecraft stood before his mirror and carefully arranged his facial hair, he was performing a small but crucial act of self-creation. He was asserting that even if the universe doesn't care about Howard Phillips Lovecraft cares about himself enough to present a carefully crafted appearance to the world. This is not vanity in any simple sense. This is something far more profound and tragic. The human refusal to surrender dignity, even in the face of cosmic indignity. It's the insistence on maintaining standards of personal presentation, even when those standards have no ultimate justification beyond our own stubborn insistence that they matter. Terror management theory tells us that much of human behavior can be understood as an attempt to manage the anxiety that comes from awareness of our own mortality and meaninglessness. We engage in what psychologists call meaning maintenance, constantly working to repair and reinforce our sense that life has purpose and that our actions matter. The mustache becomes a daily ritual of meaning maintenance, a small but essential act of imposing order on chaos. But there's something deeply moving about this behavior as well. In Lovecraft's careful attention to his appearance, we see not just neurosis or denial, but a kind of heroic defiance. He understood better than most that human beings are cosmically insignificant, yet he refused to live in a way that accepted that insignificance as the final word. His mustache became a daily declaration: I may be nothing in the cosmic scheme, but I will be a well-groomed nothing. I will maintain my standards. I will not surrender my humanity to the void. This is what makes Lovecraft's mustache philosophy so relevant to our contemporary moment. We live in an age of unprecedented existential awareness. We know about climate change, about the heat death of the universe, about the possible simulation hypothesis, about artificial intelligence that may soon surpass human capabilities. We are bombarded daily with reminders of our own fragility and ultimate insignificance. Yet, we continue to style ourselves. We continue to perform the rituals of self-care and self-presentation, even when, especially when, we understand how absurd these rituals really are. Because to be human is to engage in this constant, futile, magnificent act of self-creation in the face of forces that dwarf our comprehension. Fast forward from Lovecraft's Providence to our contemporary digital landscape, and the mustache philosophy becomes not just relevant, but urgently necessary for understanding our current existential predicament. If Lovecraft's careful grooming represented one man's attempt to impose order on cosmic chaos, then our social media profiles, Instagram filters, and carefully curated online personas represent the same impulse scaled up to a global, interconnected level. Consider the modern mustache, not literal facial hair, but the digital equivalent, the perfectly crafted Twitter bio that reduces a complex human existence to a few witty words and strategic emoji, the Instagram post that transforms mundane reality into aesthetically pleasing content, the TikTok video that distills personality into 15 seconds of carefully choreographed performance. These are not mere vanity projects. They are existential survival strategies. We live in an era that Lovecraft could hardly have imagined, yet one that perfectly validates his cosmic pessimism. The internet has made us acutely aware of our own insignificance in ways that previous generations never experienced. We scroll through endless feeds of content, confronted daily with the reality that there are billions of other people all competing for the same limited pools of attention and recognition. We exist in a digital cosmos where going viral is the modern equivalent of cosmic significance. And most of us will never even register as a blip on the algorithmic radar. The parallels to Lovecraftian horror are striking and deliberate. Just as his characters encountered entities too vast for human comprehension, we find ourselves interfacing with algorithmic systems whose decision-making processes are entirely opaque to us. The YouTube algorithm, the Facebook feed, the recommendation engines that shape our reality, these are our modern Cthulhus, vast and indifferent intelligences that determine our fate according to logics we cannot understand or influence. And how do we respond? We craft mustaches, digital mustaches. We spend hours perfecting our LinkedIn profiles, creating personal brands that we hope will make us stand out in an ocean of identical personal brands. We develop elaborate aesthetic philosophies around our Instagram feeds, carefully curating color palettes and themes that will create the illusion of coherent identity in a fragmented world. We write thoughtful captions that transform ordinary experiences into profound insights, performing depth and authenticity for audiences who are performing the exact same depth and authenticity right back at us. The cruel irony is that these digital grooming rituals often intensify the very anxieties they're meant to alleviate. The more we carefully craft our online personas, the more we realize how artificial they are. The more we seek validation through likes and shares, the more we realize how arbitrary and meaningless these forms of digital approval really are. We are trapped in what we might call infinite aesthetic recursion, constantly styling ourselves for an audience that is itself constantly styling itself for us. But here's where Lovecraft's insights become truly prescient. He understood that this kind of recursive meaninglessness was not a bug in the human condition, but its fundamental feature.
His cosmic entities were terrifying precisely because they revealed the absurdity of human meaning-making projects while offering no alternative. Similarly, our digital age has not replaced older forms of existential anxiety, but has simply made them more visible and more immediate. Consider the phenomenon of doom scrolling, the compulsive consumption of negative news and information that leaves us feeling helpless and overwhelmed. This is essentially a form of modern Lovecraftian horror fiction, except that instead of reading about cosmic entities that dwarf human comprehension, we're scrolling through real-time updates about climate change, political chaos, and global pandemics. We are confronting forces that are genuinely beyond individual human control, and our response is to style ourselves. We create elaborate morning routines and self-care rituals. We buy skincare products and meditation apps and productivity systems. We develop personal philosophies and aesthetic preferences and carefully curated reading lists. We grow literal mustaches or dye our hair or develop signature fashion senses. All of these activities serve the same psychological function that Lovecraft's mustache served for him. They are small, manageable ways of asserting control and creating meaning in the face of overwhelming chaos. The meme culture that dominates contemporary internet communication is particularly revealing in this context. Memes are essentially a form of collective meaning-making that acknowledges its own absurdity. When we create and share memes about existential dread, climate anxiety, or political helplessness, we are performing exactly the kind of dignified absurdity that Lovecraft embodied. We're saying, in effect, yes, everything is meaningless and terrible, but at least we can make jokes about it. At least we can style our despair into something shareable and aesthetically pleasing. This is the mustache philosophy in its purest contemporary form. The recognition that meaning-making is both necessary and absurd, both dignified and futile. We cannot stop creating elaborate rituals of self-presentation even when we understand that these rituals have no ultimate cosmic significance. We cannot help but impose our aesthetic preferences on chaos, even when we know that chaos will ultimately win. The difference between Lovecraft's era and our own is not that we've solved the problem of existential meaninglessness, but that we've democratized it. Where once cosmic horror was the specialized concern of isolated intellectuals and literary artists, now it's the daily experience of anyone with a smartphone and an internet connection. We are all amateur Lovecrafts now, staring into digital abysses and trying to maintain our sanity through careful aesthetic curation. And perhaps that's exactly as it should be. Perhaps the mustache philosophy suggests that the appropriate response to cosmic insignificance is not despair or nihilism, but a kind of ironic commitment to beauty and style and personal presentation. If we're going to be nothing in the grand scheme of things, we might as well be aesthetically interesting nothings.
So here we are, at the end of our strange philosophical journey, staring at the ultimate question that Lovecraft's mustache poses to us. What does it mean to be human in a universe that offers no inherent meaning, yet to persist in the fundamentally human activity of creating meaning anyway? The mustache, as we've discovered, was never really about facial hair at all. It was about the magnificent, tragic, absurd, human refusal to accept meaninglessness as the final word. Every morning, when Lovecraft stood before his mirror and carefully arranged those whiskers, he was performing an act of cosmic rebellion. He was asserting that even if the universe doesn't care about human standards of dignity and presentation, humans will continue to maintain those standards anyway. This is what makes the mustache philosophy so profound and so relevant to our contemporary moment. We live in an age where the sources of meaning that sustained previous generations, religious faith, national identity, traditional career paths, stable communities, have largely dissolved or become optional lifestyle choices rather than given foundations. We are more aware than ever of our own mortality, fragility, and ultimate insignificance in the cosmic scheme. And yet, we continue to style ourselves. We continue to craft identities. We continue to impose aesthetic order on existential chaos. Is this behavior rational? Absolutely not. Is it psychologically necessary? Absolutely yes. Is it dignified? That depends on your perspective. Is it beautiful? Perhaps that's the wrong question entirely. The mustache philosophy suggests that we might be asking the wrong questions when we interrogate the meaning of human existence. Instead of asking whether our meaning-making activities are justified or rational or cosmically significant, perhaps we should ask whether they are authentically human. And the answer to that question is unambiguously yes. To be human is to be a creature that cannot help but create patterns, impose order, and craft significance, even in the face of overwhelming evidence that these activities are ultimately futile. We are the species that looks into the abyss and then styles our hair before jumping in. We are the creatures that discover our own cosmic insignificance and respond by developing elaborate theories of personal aesthetics. This is neither tragic nor comic, but something more complex, something we might call cosmically absurd. In the most technical philosophical sense, we are creatures whose nature it is to rebel against our own nature, to create meaning in full awareness of meaninglessness, to maintain dignity in the face of cosmic indignity. The mustache becomes, in this final analysis, a perfect symbol of human existence itself. Carefully maintained, ultimately temporary, serving no cosmic purpose, yet somehow essential to who we are. It is groomed daily with the full knowledge that it will eventually be erased by time. Yet this knowledge does not make the grooming any less important to the one doing it. Perhaps the aliens who eventually discover our ruins will understand something profound when they catalog our obsession with styling ourselves. Perhaps they will recognize in our mustaches and beards and carefully arranged hair not the pathetic vanity of a deluded species, but the heroic defiance of creatures who refused to surrender their humanity, even when they understood how little that humanity meant in cosmic terms. Or perhaps they will simply find us incomprehensible as Cthulhu was to Lovecraft's characters. Perhaps the very human impulse to find meaning in meaninglessness, to create beauty in the face of chaos, to maintain personal standards in an indifferent universe, is itself a form of cosmic horror, beautiful and terrible and utterly alien to any rational perspective on existence. But that's someone else's problem. We are humans, and we cannot help but be human. We cannot help but stand before our mirrors each morning and arrange ourselves into something that feels like dignity, even when we understand that dignity is a category we invented for ourselves. We cannot help but impose our aesthetic preferences on the void, even when we know the void is not impressed by our aesthetics. The mustache endures, not because it means anything to the universe, but because it means something to us. And in the end, perhaps that distinction is the only one that matters. Not because it's cosmically significant, but because we are incapable of caring about cosmic significance more than we care about ourselves. So, trim your mustaches, curate your Instagram feeds, develop your personal philosophies, and maintain your morning routines. Not because these activities will save you from the abyss, but because engaging in them is what it means to be beautifully, absurdly, magnificently human in the face of an indifferent cosmos. The universe may not care about your mustache, but you do. And in the end, that's the only rebellion available to us. And perhaps the only rebellion we need.